Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Tzadi Tes is the last daf in the 9th parak of Pesachim, that is parak Mishahaya. This is also the last parak and the last daf in the 5 parak long discussion about the halachos of Karban Pesach. Beginning in the second half of the daf is the 10th parak Arvi Pesachim, which introduces us to the subject of how exactly do you run a Pesach Seder. So, before we finish it off, we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, which the Gemara introduces. Machlokes is about what is the minimum amount of people that have to stay registered on a Karban Pesach if people are leaving. We know that if you've registered to a Karban up to a certain point, you can still withdraw. Question is how many people still have to stay. So it's learned out of the pasuk im yamat habayis mihyos miseh. If the house is too small to be registered to the sheep, but we read it as if it says im yima'et habayis mihyos miseh, if you're shrinking the amount of people registered to the sheep. So you're allowed to shrink up to a point, but it has to be mihyos miseh. So what's the point? So Rabbi Yossi says as follows: you can't leave the Pesach with no owners for any moment. You could switch everybody off, but there can't be a time at which the Karban has nobody on it. So if everybody wants to leave, you have to first register other people, and then all the original people who are signed up can leave. It can never have a time when it's empty. Rabbi Yehuda says slightly differently. He says there has to be at least one person that remains from the original people that sign up. If everybody wants to leave and a new group come, somebody from the old group has to stay. You can't have it be totally switched. You have to have somebody from the old group. So the Gemara says, let's look at our most recent Mishnah and see which one of these two opinions fits with our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, what happens when you have two groups of people that have Karban Pesachs and they confuse them with each other? What do you do? So the Mishnah said, well, you make it tanai. Each one choose one of the two animals, which they don't know if it's theirs or the other ones, and you make it tanai. If it's mine, then I'm okay, and if not, if it's not mine, if it was originally the other groups, then I'm switching off mine to this one. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah had spelled out that when you do this, somebody has to stick with the Karban originally, and it said the following thing. It said, let's say you have two groups, so each one they have now confused their Karban with another one. Each one has confused its Karban animal with another one. So how are you going to do it? So each one will choose one of the animals, and one person leaves each Chabura and goes to the other group, the other Chabura. What's the point in that? Because then you'll say as follows. Each group will say the following thing. This animal we chose, if it's ours, good. And you who are joining us, you're leaving your group, and you're joining our group. No problem. If, however, it is not ours, then it's yours. So you're sticking with it all along, all this time, and that's fine. And we are leaving our Karban and going to this Karban. Okay. Now, the next thing the Gemara had said, the Mishnah had said, was that what if each Karban Pesach is only brought by one person? So there you can't do this because there isn't anybody to switch from one group to the other group. There's only one person. So the Mishnah said you have to add another person to each individual. That way it's a group of two. And then the original person can switch to the other group and you can do the same procedure and you'll just leave behind on this Karban the person who joined. So the Gemara says, this obviously doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda because what's going to end up happening is that each animal will not have necessarily somebody from its original group left on it. Right? If Reuben first signed up to an animal and then Reuben confuses his animal with a different animal. Now he's not sure which one is his. So Reuben takes another guy from the street. He takes Shimon and says, now it's Reuben and Shimon. And then Reuben goes to the other animal. If in truth that he's now switching from the animal that he's chosen to the other animal, again, he doesn't know which one's his, but if he switches to the other animal and he doesn't know if in fact the one he switched to was not his, he switched off his to a different one, then who's left on his? He's the original owner, he's not there. And the person he brought him from the street wasn't there originally, so it doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that says you have to have somebody there who's from the original group not leaving. So Gemara says not necessarily. Really it does fit, because Rabbi Yehuda also holds of another halacha. Rabbi Yehuda holds of halacha that you cannot have a Karban shachted for one person alone. A Karban Pesach has to have a minimum of two. Therefore, when these two Karbanos were each owned individually by one person, there was gonna be somebody added. There had to be somebody added. You couldn't shacht it without somebody added. Since somebody had to be added, the person that you add is considered to be one of the original registrants. There's a minimum of two. Therefore, it's not considered like the way we define the originals are the first two at least, because you can't have less than two. Therefore, it's not a problem that the first one switches off to the other carbon, because the second one still counts as one of the originals, and you still have one of the originals. Says the Gemara, I'll even prove to you that this has to be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because the Mishnah also says what happens when you have 5 groups, and each group has 5 people. So you do the same thing. 4 people leave each group, 1 goes to each of the other groups, and you say the same speech. The carbon that we chose, if it's ours, good, you're leaving your group and joining ours. If it's not ours, then if it's yours, then you're sticking with it, and we are withdrawing from our group and joining you in this animal with this group. And they say it with each of the 4 people, and therefore all possibilities are covered. They are certainly joined with one animal. Now, the problem is like this. Why does it have to be 5 groups of 5 people each? Only 4 people have to leave their own group. There are 5 groups, so that means each group has 4 groups beside it. So if the group is a group of 4, so it should be fine. All 4 will go to one of the other 4 groups, and then a new group will be formed by a person that comes from each of the other groups to take the place of this group that completely dissolved. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that Rabbi Yossi would say that you cannot have the carbon be completely empty. You can never have all 4 people leave and go to a different one of the other 4 and join those groups, and then a new set come. Fine, so you can't have it completely empty. So what will you do? So bring somebody from the street. Let that person from the street join the group of 4. And now the original 4 can go to the other groups, and that person can stay with this group. But the Mishnah doesn't offer that as a solution. It says it has to be 5 groups of 5 people each. If it's 4 people each, it sounds like there is no solution. So obviously what that means is that in that case, you wouldn't be able to use a person from the street, because we're holding like Rabbi Yehuda. This Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Even if you bring in somebody from the street, he's not one of the original registrants, that would not be enough. You could not let everybody else go, because it would violate, and therefore that would explain why the Mishnah doesn't offer this as a possible solution. You have to have at least a minimum of 5 originally on the group. So therefore it does fit very nicely with Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara accepts this, and that concludes the 9th parak of Maseches Pesachim. Okay, now we begin the 10th, which discusses what happens. How do you begin the Pesach Seder? So the Mishnah that begins the parak offers 3 halachas. This is, first of all, you're supposed to be hungry. You're supposed to eat the matzah with an appetite, and therefore you should not eat from after Plag HaMincha. But it doesn't say Plag HaMincha, it says Samach LeMincha. Samach LeMincha means half an hour before Plag HaMincha. Now Plag HaMincha is 2.5 hours before Shkia, which means it is 8.5 hours into the day, in a 12-hour day, which is what all days have. It is 9.5 hours into the day, correction, is 9.5 hours into the day. Samach LePlag HaMincha, Samach LeMincha would be close to Mincha, would be half an hour earlier, would be already from the 9th hour of the day. You should not eat. Now, the Mishnah therefore is telling you, already from the 9th hour, you shouldn't eat until it gets dark, until you start the Pesach Seder. Next halacha, the Mishnah says, even a poor person is obligated in the mitzvah of his seva to lean like a rich man when he sits by the Pesach Seder. And the third halacha is that even a poor person has to have 4 cups of wine, and even if he's fed by the public soup kitchen, they have to provide him with 4 cups of wine to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, now we begin the Gemara. The Gemara says, why is this a special halacha for Erev Pesach? Because you have to be hungry for the matzah. This halacha applies every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tov. You're supposed to be hungry for the Yom Tov and Shabbos Suda. As a matter of fact, we have a brisa that spells this clearly out. It brings the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, you're right. He doesn't say that you're not allowed to eat close to nightfall on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, but Rabbi Yehuda does. Rabbi Yehuda says a person should not eat from mincha time, from Plag HaMincha, in order that he should be hungry for the Suda. So, why does our Mishnah seem to say that this is a Pesach halacha? It's not a Pesach halacha. It applies to every Yom Tov and Shabbos. So Gemara offers a couple answers. Gemara first of all says, Rav Huna says, you're right. This doesn't fit according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it would make sense to say on Erev Pesach he can't. He can't eat from mincha time every Shabbos and Yom Tov. Therefore, this Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says generally there's no problem. Most Shabbos and Yom Tov we don't care. But Erev Pesach, because of the mitzvah of matzah, we want you to have an appetite. Therefore, I agree that Erev Pesach you should not eat from Plag HaMincha and onward. So Gemara offers another answer. This one is Rav Papa, and he says no. This Mishnah could even be Rabbi Yehuda, but there's a difference between the halacha on Erev Pesach and other Shabbosim and Yamim Tovim, and that is, Erev Pesach, it says, Samoch lemincha, that's half an hour before Plag. Every other time, the Brisa you quoted, he just says, from Mincha time, that's 2.5 hours before Shkia. Here you have to go, on Erev Pesach, you have to go an extra half an hour earlier so that you'd be extra hungry. So Gemara says, but hold on a second, have another Brisa. And this Brisa says, that on every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tov you should not eat from the 9th hour. 9th hour is half an hour before Plag, just like we're saying here in our Mishnah. So your answer falls out the window, and it ends up being a contradiction between the two brises. One says Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov you can't eat from Mincha time, and the other one says you can't eat from half an hour before Mincha. So Gemara wants to say maybe one of them is wrong, and how do you know which one's wrong? Obviously, it's a mistake. One of them is a mistake. So maybe the one that's wrong is the one that says that it's supposed to be half an hour before, and therefore our answer from before applies very nicely. The correct brisa says that every Erev Shabbos and Yom Tov you cannot eat from Plag Mincha 2.5 hours before Shkia, from 9.5 hours in the day, and Erev Pesach we go an extra half hour earlier. So Gemara says, no, it can't be a mistaken brisa. It's not true, because Rav Yemar, or maybe Mareimar, said that he went to the shir of Rabbi Pinchas Breder Rav Hami, and somebody stood up and said over this brisa exactly the way I quoted it, and he accepted it. Obviously, it's a correct brisa. So you have to go back to our original answer that our Mishnah here is only in the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, not in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.